Yeah, you guessed it. It's me, yet again, the great and glorious, soon to be famous one day, Nick Dutch, back on the camera again one more time on a wonderful and fantastic Get Me Off-Grid video blog, whereby I'm exploring off-grid ideas for the purposes of getting myself to the point of being off-grid with your help, links below, okay? So what I'm going to do today is just to try and encapsulate, just off the top of my head, everything I've learned so far about yeast, fermentation, and essentially the production of ethanol, stroke biofuel at home, trying to do it in a cost-effective way and a environmentally friendly way. First and foremost, when you're doing fermentation, the yeast does not eat the sugar. The yeast is breathing the sugar because it's taking oxygen molecules out of the sugar itself, and the result of the respiration of the yeast is the production of the alcohol. It is possible to have fermentation activity without any alcohol being produced, as a direct result of having enough oxygen within the solution to provide the little yeast cells with what they require. That's one thing to bear in mind. That's why you need to have a nutrient, because the yeast will eat the nutrients and breathe the sugar. And you're keeping this in an anaerobic environment, namely with the lid of your fermenter closed. The different types of yeast is very variable. I've been using a turbo yeast so far, and turbo yeast does not end up in a proper suspension, because it doesn't like a bud off a new cell when it's multiplying. Okay, it makes lots of strings of cells. They sort of like a bud, but stay on the same connected thing, which is why you need extra chemicals to clear the solution better, which is one of the reasons why I was using Turbo Clear rather than just like letting it settle over a long period of time. Okay, I was also being impatient on my first distillation run. That's one thing. There's lots of other forms of yeast as well, but you can still use a standard baker's yeast, provided of course you're willing to wait between 10 days and of course 3 weeks at the outside. What else can I tell you? If you were to distill up to 96%, you would be ending up with a form of ethanol which would contain 6 kilowatts worth of energy within every single litre. That's quite a lot of energy, but you've also got to take into account how rapidly it burns to work out your kilowatts per hour. I've been looking on the internet and I've seen some burners which are essentially a half litre container, and they take 4 hours to burn through. So basically do the mathematics, or I'll do the mathematics for you, shall I? Here we go. Totally off the cuff, unrehearsed. You can't say better than that. So if we're talking about half a litre, we'll be talking about 3 kilowatts. So type in 3 kilowatts. Divide that by 4 hours. Each burner would be giving off 750 watt hours when you're burning it. Now it's not necessarily enough for you to be able to warm your place up. So if I clear that, okay, we think let's say we want to create 3 kilowatts. So we'll type in 3 and we'll divide that by 0.75 to tell us how many burners we would need. It says there we'd need 4. Okay, that's if you're using that type of burner that has a known burning time for bioethanol liquid. So these are obviously things to take into account. Now, if you're going to try and cut down the cost of doing the fermentation, you've got to find a way of cutting down the actual cost of the sugar. Now, I've already discussed the possibility of getting for free waste sugar from a restaurant, a food factory, or a supermarket. So if you can achieve that, which I would have thought would be relatively easy, then done and dusted, not a problem. But then of course there's the nutrients. What are you going to do for that? Well, all the recipes online seem to imply that one could use a combination of Marmite or Vegemite, potatoes, tomato paste, and wheat germ. Some recipes also involve the use of barley or sprouted barley to provide some kind of enzymes which are also beneficial for the growing of the kind of yeast that you require when making alcohol. 10 days is a good fermentation time for a bread yeast, but apparently you need more sometimes, you need less sometimes the fermentation can stop, you need to find ways of stimulating it. You've also got to try and make sure that the temperature you're keeping your fermentation at is basically nice and stable, so that you get a more predictable fermentation time. Of course, when it comes to distillation, the solution's got to be cleared. The type of still which I've now got, namely the reflux still, that will take any flavours out of the solution. So if you were someone interested in making alcohol for drinking, then that's not the type of still for yourself, but it is the type of still for myself because it distills to a very high percentage. And obviously seriously no smoking, because this stuff will, it is, to all intents and purposes, just as efficient as burning petrol in the quantity of energy it gives off. When I did the last experiment with cooling, and I took a bit of cleaning cloth and I wrapped that around the thermometer bulb and I dipped that in alcohol. Okay, I wanted to dispose of the alcohol, so I took the teeny bit of cloth outside, laid it on a pavement slab, and just put a few sparks of my cigarette lighter on it. It went up in flames straight away. That's just reminded me the kind of power we're talking about here, and given me a bit of extra respect for the fuel itself. Okay? So we have to think about the yeast. If you're thinking about using a turbo yeast, you have to use turbo clear. If you're not thinking about a turbo yeast, you're thinking about a regular bread yeast, you don't need to use turbo clear, so that will cut down the cost but increase the fermentation time. Right? As far as types of sugar are concerned, glucose is preferred, but your standard white sugar will work just as well, say some people. There's obviously more experimentation and investigation that I want to do, but I want to try and cut this down to a zero cost. If I can make sure that the production of my own bioethanol is £1.95 a litre or less, then I will be getting my bioethanol at a cheaper than market rate value. But of course, there'll have to be a calculation with each and every single distillation and fermentation that I'm doing to make sure that I'm getting there. So far, I would say to the most part, it's actually looking quite promising and quite doable. Challenging, yes. If I was to think about the quantity of alcohol I would need to keep the place heated, and let's say we'd need 4 burners going, 4 of these special burners going, thus burning up a quantity of 2 litres over a period of 4 hours and giving off 3 kilowatts worth of energy to try and keep the place warm. Let's say I would need 3 burnings in a day. 1 was 4, 2, 4 is 8, 3, 12. That's most of my waking hours, okay? With a little bit of extra time so things can cool down prior to topping them back up again and setting them on fire. Let's say I'm doing this in the winter, so I would need more or less consistent energy. Obviously that's 2, 4, 6 litres a day. How many fermentations would I need to do, and how many distillations would I need to do to be able to maintain that particular quantity of power usage? In practical terms, a heck of a lot. If I've got the same kind of output I had with the first run, I don't think I would, because obviously I was impatient with the first run and I only got 2.5 litres worth of bioethanol out. But let's say I wasn't impatient and I got 3 litres out, then essentially I would still need to do 2 distillation runs every single day to try and maintain that level of energy production. So is that actually practical and feasible? Well, if bioethanol is your only heating solution, probably not. Under those circumstances, it becomes much more feasible to try and use your bioethanol for a heat boost in the evenings, or a point during the day, and just keeping it down to, let's say, 2 litres of bioethanol consumed every single day, which means that you could possibly do, not necessarily every day, but every other day you could do a good bioethanol session. So, do you actually need 3 kilowatt hours or 3 kilowatts worth of power? That's another question. When I was a student and living in a rented room, I actually had a 3 kilowatt fan heater which had a thermostatic control. And once the temperature of the room was up to the right temperature for the thermostat to turn off, it would turn off and would stay turned off for a longer period of time. And I did an experiment one time, I remember this quite distinctly, and I actually counted using my pulse whilst I was laying in bed having a touch of insomnia. Now the quantity of time it spent turned on and the quantity of time it spent turned off I did some basic calculations in my head as to how much power it was using, and I worked out it was using more or less the same as if it was a 1.5 kilowatt heater for that one particular room, taking into account it was well double glazed. Alright, and this was in the dead of the winter, we're talking January, February time, with it being rather cold and frosty outside. So, once you've got the temperature up, do you need to keep it there? No. Maybe you could start with, start the day with your full 4 burners, and then for the rest of the day you can go down to 2 burners maybe, just to keep the temperature at a good enough level for you to feel comfortable. Or possibly in the evening then increase the temperature again with with another burner. Depends upon the temperature of the place. So the figures I've given you just there, I gave you the worst case scenario of 4 burners going, being 2 litres times 3 during the day, 246 litres. So you're a better case scenario again during the winter. Wouldn't really be quite so steep as that. And also last winter, taking into account I've been using the mains heating still, I didn't use the heating all the time. Okay, I used it in the morning. During the day I just put in a nice thick jumper, and during the evening I give the temperature another boost, and I try and keep my use of the mains heating down, and I used other things such as an electric blanket at night, because that was a lower consumption of power and still provided me with the warmth I needed. So it's going to require a bit of jiggery pokery, to use a technical term, but I've learned an awful lot. I think it is doable to try and create a more permanent heating solution, provided of course you've got some ventilation to let the moisture from the combustion out, as well as the carbon dioxide, so you're letting extra oxygen into the place, so you're not going to get yourself too sleepy, if you get my drift. But on the other hand, that's what trickle vents on your windows are there for. Okay? It could be achievable. Yes, you need to have a fair number of fermenters going, but if you just use it for your bare minimum heating, just to raise the temperature a little, you might even just be able to get away with two distillations going every single week. So you can just take one day off. Okay, if you're in a small community and you want to keep everybody warm, you might actually give one person in the community the job of perpetually getting the sugar, doing the fermentation and distillation every single day, all the time, every single day, having 42 fermenters going in cycle over a period of 3 weeks. Alright, and keeping the bioethanol going. If I am making 3 litres of bioethanol from one distillation, I'm therefore legally allowed to do 2 distillations every single day, and still to be within the legal limit of being an unregistered bioethanol producer here in the UK in accordance with our laws, provided of course that none of it goes into an engine used, a vehicle engine, and none of it goes towards something like drinking. Alright? It's an interesting subject. It has potential if you can find a way of working it into your day. I think one of the reasons that a lot of people don't go for off-grid type living, or don't want to move towards off-grid type living, is purely because of the feeling of inconvenience that it would take to try and change your life pattern to incorporate the technology. But I'm willing to give it a go. So this coming winter, I'm hoping to have much more in the way of bioethanol technology going, and maybe even getting a couple of those burners so I can use them both for stoves as well as for heating the place. If you think about it, if I could work out the depth of each singular burner, taking into account that each burner is supposed to burn for 4 hours, and let's say I want half an hour's worth of burn time, take the distance of the whole height of the thing, divide it by 4, that'll leave me with 1 hour's worth of burn time. Divide that by 2, that'll give me an approximate half an hour. Then all I need to do is to get bent coat hangers or whatever it is, bent metal wire coat hangers, and make myself some good pot stands which are high enough to be able to provide enough room for the oxygen to get through, so that the flame can be fed, as well as to provide the heat for the pot. And I could then use that for all of my basic requirements. If I use a big enough pot, then my hot water for washing up, okay, personal hygiene, so on and so forth. And if I make it, smaller scale, then essentially heating for my tea and coffee and the rest of that. Okay, it's doable within reason, and it's actually quite exciting. The more you think about it, from a more practical standpoint, it becomes, well, I'm using the word practical rather than advisedly here. From a standpoint, it becomes more economical just to use the bioethanol for cooking purposes. But I don't want to just stop there. Okay, I want to really kick this up a gear, and that's part of my goal in going towards off-grid, using this as one of the many technologies at my disposal. Thank you for your time.